Welcome to the Pat White Show. Well, if you're one of many thousands of students that has taken out a student loan, and you've had it for a number of years, yes, you've completed your education, but you still owe the money, but you figured, may not have to pay it back. You know, for a long time, the Biden administration was trying to get those loans forgiven. They went to court, and the court says, no, you can't do that. That taxpayers are entitled to their money back. So they've had a hiatus on going after these loans because of the pandemic that happened back 5 years ago. But guess what? The Trump administration has made a decision, and starting the first week of January, just so you know, the first week of January, the first 1,000 individuals with student loans in default will be contacted because they're coming after those loans. That's just 1,000. Next week it's even more. The next week is even more than that. The administration said we are going after people who owe the money, who haven't paid it, and frankly, didn't think they were going to have to pay it. And because of that, they're going to be in default on their loans, and that's going to mean everything from, well, garnishment of their pay, which very much could happen through the IRS, or even coming after it for their assets. I'm not sure that they're going to go that far, but it all depends on how much you owe. Now, if you had a payment plan, and yes, the government gave it, said, well, we're not going to enforce that for a while. Back during the Biden administration, they did exactly that. Said, well, we're not going to enforce it, in hopes that, well, maybe it would go away and nobody thought anything about it. But here's what's happened. The Trump administration took a look and said, these folks owe all this money. And this is taxpayer money. And frankly, they want it back. So if you're one of those people who has a student loan, hasn't paid it, and hasn't paid it in a long time, be prepared, because you're about to get a notice from the federal government and the Internal Revenue Service saying, you owe the money, they're going to come and get it. And believe me, if they put the IRS on you and say, we're going to start garnishing your loan, they're going to contact your employer and they're going to say, start taking money out of that person's check. They can do it. Trust me, they've done it. Now, if you're not working, say, well, I'm unemployed or whatever, well, they could go after your assets or even after you. Your home, your property, your car, put a lien on stuff you own. And eventually they'll get their dollars. It sounds harsh, and in some ways it is. But the people who took out the loans, you knew what you were getting into when you took out the loan. Everybody who has a loan knows they have to repay it. And if students are out there thinking, I don't have to repay this loan, the government's going to say, well, gee whiz, I don't have to do it. And they tried, but the court said no, can't do that. Got to pay back the loan. So if you're in default or haven't paid your loan, guess what? You're going to be getting a letter soon. And the letter will ultimately result in the IRS and the government getting their money back. One way, shape, or form, it's going to happen. You've been informed, and now you know. Recently, Stephen A. Smith, a noted sports columnist and raconteur, if you want to call him that, came down and had a definitive speech about what he thinks about Caitlin Clark. And frankly, he told the truth, because there's a lot of haters of Caitlin Clark for a lot of reasons. One, well, they don't think she belongs in the WNBA. And two, well, they just don't like the fact that she's better than anybody else. But she is. And whether anybody likes it or not, Caitlin Clark is becoming a brand. And I mean a serious brand. And when she returns to the WNBA, if they have a season next year, she is going to be worth more than the entire league itself, simply because she's that phenom that you see once in a while that comes along every so often, but is bigger than you could possibly imagine. Now, did you happen to see the new TV commercial that came out on Christmas for NBA games and the NFL games? featured Caitlin Clark in a number of different, well, locations, if you will. One of the ones started out in a neighborhood, and she was out there hitting shots on a driveway. And the girl says, "Hey, can you hit it from here?" And she did. What you have to understand is when she was a kid, she actually pleaded with her father to tear up grass in their front yard so she could have a longer distance range to shoot. She said, I got to be able to shoot farther than 30 feet. And she pleaded with her dad, put in more concrete, tear out the lawn. I need a lot farther distance to be able to shoot. Because she saw a WNBA game, I think it was a Minnesota game, and she came back and then she said, man, I got to shoot farther than that. So basically she developed her game, not an inside game, not a mid-range game, not a layup game. She developed a long-distance game. Not only that, a logo game. She'd shoot from the logos. And that's what she did. And she would be outside shooting as a kid until her hands went numb. Her parents will tell you that. So she went to college, became a phenom, right? Major scores, just broke every record you think of at Iowa. Came into the NBA, and she was snubbed to go on to the Olympic team because they said, well, she doesn't have enough time, she doesn't have the experience, she doesn't have the, well, whatever it was they wanted. Not a good plan because when the Olympics played, the gyms were half full. Nobody wanted to see what was going on. Nobody cared. That may be changing very soon because they are now getting things set up for the USA team that ultimately will go to the Olympics. And it appears that Caitlin Clark will be the one who's going to be leading the charge with a whole new style of basketball. Fast-paced, moving, passing. That's what she's good at. That's what she knows she can do, and shooting the long-range stuff, that's what she's good at. Because remember, when she shoots, there's step-back shots. Long distance, she doesn't move in. Now, when she passes, she sees the court probably better than a lot of other WNBA. Years ago in the late 60s, his name was Nate Archibald. They called him Tiny. Tiny went to Texas Western College. I know because I went to college with him. And he could pass the ball better than anybody I've ever seen. And taking pictures of him down the court of the games, you just never knew where that ball was going to go. Well, Nate did that in the pros as well. So he's got the style. Caitlin has the style of a Nate Archibald, passing the ball. She knows how to do it. You never know where it's going to go. But she does have players who know when it's coming to her. Now, that's how good she is. So Nike runs this commercial, and it's got little nuggets in it here and there, little marshmallows for you to kind of take a look at. Ooh, look at that. Look where she's shooting. And then she talked about people. Michael Chi, remember him from Saturday Night Live? Uh-huh. And then how about Travis Scott, the rapper? And then, of course, who doesn't know Travis Kelce? I mean, he and Taylor Swift, that's all everybody talks about in the NFL. So she goes to the NFL is now saying, yeah, if Travis Kelce talks about her, she's part of the NFL. That's a different organization, different group of people. You go to Travis Scott, you go to the rappers. So the rappers are saying, hey, you're part of us. You're part of our group. And Michael Chi, comedian, stand-up guy, you're going to all the new audiences, not just people who love the WNBA, not just people into basketball. Now you're going into people in football. You're going into the people in comedy. You're going into people in rapping. You're covering all the areas. And now they're saying, well, here we got that nugget that Nike put out. Now everybody says, well, she's only making $28 million a year. That was her deal. That was the appetizer, folks. That was just the appetizer. Because remember, when they put all those shirts on every seat in the Bainbridge Fieldhouse, everybody got a Caitlin Clark, the CC shirt, the logo shirt, the brand. And in that commercial, you saw her wearing the hoodie, the whole thing, CC on it. That is the brand. You know, Michael Jordan, he has a brand, right? I want to show you something. Michael Jordan is now flying a new airplane, a new private airplane, it's a 650 ER. And trust me, This thing from Grumman to 650 ER cost $70 million. But look what's on the tail of Michael's plane. Not the Chicago Bulls on there, it's the jumping man. And that's what you notice. Caitlin Clark is going to be a phenom like nothing you have ever seen. And if she pulls off $150 million of shoes, that's the reason that Nike has waited so long, because they're having to make a whole lot more shoes than they do for anybody normally. A lot more shoes. Because they believe the moment it breaks, it's going to sell out like nothing they've ever seen, and she will become a bigger brand than anybody in sports has ever done. 150 million? Pretty serious stuff. Now, here's the last thing to talk about. There is a very strong rumor that Nike has purchased 90 seconds of time in the upcoming Super Bowl. Now, I don't know if it means a 90-second spot, means 3 30-second spots. I don't know. But if it in fact is true, and Nike is spending that kind of money for 90 seconds, they're getting ready to announce something big, and I mean really big. Could it be the shoe? Could very well be. If it is going to be a monster situation. So I'm just letting you know what's going on. Yep, Caitlin Clark has her haters out there, but it doesn't really matter, because now she's not becoming just a basketball player. Caitlin Clark is becoming a brand. And that brand is going to rival the jumping man from none other than Michael Jordan, who is currently her coach in the world of Nike. And now you know. Well, what do you say we jump into the old time machine with Sherman and Peabody? Well, let's go back to the year 1993. 1993 was over 30 years ago, but something interesting happened in that date. It was Super Bowl day, 1993. Dallas Cowboys were playing the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo had a great quarterback, Jim Kelly. Thought they would finally give Buffalo a championship, but alas, he was suffered a serious injury to his knee. And now the Cowboys ended up beating Buffalo 52-17. Jimmy Johnson was coaching the Dallas Cowboys, and their quarterback was a guy named Troy Aikman. I see Troy on TV a lot. He's now an analyst. But here's the deal. A commercial played during the game. You see, back in the 90s, showing a commercial there pretty much determined how your year was going to be, and you paid a lot of money. But a commercial appeared that has now come back, today, to the year 2025, only in a different fashion. What was that commercial? Well, it featured two basketball players, two very famous basketball players. One was the name of Larry Bird. That's right, the hick from French Lick. Larry Bird, Boston Celtics superstar, was playing another superstar who was really a superstar, Michael Jordan. Two basketball players fighting over, guess what? A Big Mac. And the whole deal created a game of horse in basketball, where one person shoots a shot, the other person has to equal it, and the person calls another shot, has to equal it. Well, these two went back and forth playing this game of horse, but they ended up their challenge. Each challenge ended up with the word nothing but net. Remember that? Nothing but net. Well, that term, nothing but net, exists even today. So that was the line that was brought up. Now, the reason I bring that up is Caitlin Clark new commercial just came out and premiered during during the Christmas holiday. And her line was, from anywhere. Not nothing but net, but from anywhere. Now, where do you think that came from? Well, it came from the idea from the Nike folks, but guess whose camp Caitlin Clark exists in? The Michael Jordan wing of Nike. That's right, Michael Jordan has been her mentor, her coach, if you will. And maybe, just maybe, Michael Jordan went to the Nike people and says, hey, back in the 90s, Larry Bird and I did this commercial, nothing but net, and it became a slogan that exists even today, 30-some years later. How about a new slogan for her, maybe a little different, from anywhere? And that may be where that particular slogan and new slogan came from. Nothing but net turned into from anywhere. Now that's just a supposition on my part, but think about it. Nothing but net, Michael Jordan coaching Caitlin Clark, and hers is from anywhere, everywhere. Oh, and promoting the Nike brand, the Nike clothing, the Nike everything. And now, believe it or not, waiting for her shoes to come out. But here's something you didn't know. Nike isn't promoting overseas in Europe, but the people in Europe are screaming, saying, give us Nike merchandise. Caitlin Clark is a phenom even over here in Europe. So there's a lady that's become a phenom in basketball because she's classy, she's sharp, and she can, shoot from everywhere and hit it and get nothing but net. And now you know. Well, for those of you who have been watching any of my my videos, my podcasts, if you choose to call them that, I have a confession to make. I am one of, roughly 10 to 12% of people in the world who happens to be left-handed. That's right. I am born left-handed. Now, I did a little research on my family tree going, back on both sides to find out if there's anybody else left-handed in my lineage. Turns out there's not. Apparently, I'm the only one who is left-handed. None of my kids are left-handed, none of my family members. I'm the only one who's left-handed. Now, growing up, that could be a bit of a hindrance, and let me explain to you why. You see, people don't like left-handed people, and everybody in my life tried to change me from being a left-handed person to a right-handed person. Now, when I was a kid, I was in parochial school, and the nuns did not like the fact I was writing with my left hand. They had these rulers they'd carry around with them, and they kept swatting me on the hand to put my pen in my right hand. And I'd put it in my right hand and go, no, I don't like doing this. I'd move it back to my left hand. Well, ultimately, considering all the schools that I went to, eventually they just sort of left me alone. Apparently, they figured I was an anomaly, I was weird or whatever, and they let me go being left-handed. But when you go through school, all of the desks, you sit in the desk, and it has this angle thing that comes out the board and everything you write on. Well, you slide in from the left-hand side, but the way the board works on the top of the desk, you write right-handed. And left-handers, that's kind of hard to difficult to write on a right-handed desk. Then there's also another thing I learned, that when I was writing, I was smearing everything with the bottom part of my left hand. That's because I had the hook. Yes, I'm one of those people who writes with the hook. Now, I've noticed a lot of women who are left-handed, I've observed, they don't have that hook. Whatever women do, they've turned the paper, they have done whatever they did in their lives to write natural like regular people do. And frankly, their handwriting is better than mine. Now, I do not write cursive. I quit doing that a long, long time ago. I can't tell you why. I just wasn't very good at it. And so I just print. And that's how I run my life. I'm a printer. And so I've had to live with being a left-hander all of my life. And everything else you dealt with, it was for right-handed people. So you adjusted. Whatever you had to deal with, they say, well, left-handed people can't use scissors. Yeah, scissors are fine. Most everything out there, left-handed, I can handle pretty well. That's not an issue. But when I joined the Air Force, one time I was at my flight surgeon's for whatever it was, and he noticed I was left-handed, and he said, did you know that roughly 1/4 of all Air Force pilots are also left-handed? And I went, really? He said, yep. He said, normally, like I said, it's around 10%. He said, with the Air Force, it's roughly 25%, maybe a little bit more. And I said, do you know why? He said, well, it turns out that right-handed people, well, when you're right-handed, you're right-handed. You do everything right-handed. Flying airplanes, you got to use both hands. You got one hand on the stick, one hand on the throttles, and if you're flying a heavy, you got one hand on the yoke and one hand on the throttles. you got to use both hands. Well, turns out that Air Force people who are left-handed, they tend to adapt better to flying airplanes because they can use both hands at the same time. It's sort of like being an ambidextrous, but we're not, but we can do a lot of things both ways. Speaking of ambidextrous, on blackboards, I used to write right-handed on blackboards because, well, you can't write a left-handed because you erase everything and you got the hook anyways. It doesn't work. But turns out a lot of left-handed people in the world. So I got to thinking, gee, how many famous people out there are left-handed? So I did a little research, and I found a list of some of the people who are left-handed who you may have heard of. Oprah. Yep, Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey, left-handed. When she's cooking, she's left-hander. Now, if you want to get fancy and hoi polloi, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court, she's left-handed. And you want to get royalty? Prince William, left-handed, over in England. But now, is he left-handed? Queen Victoria was, King George VI was, the Queen Mother was, even Queen Elizabeth too, and King Charles III, as well as Prince George. They're all left-handed in that royal family. Now, you can work on the lineage of that thing, how they got there. They got plenty of left-handers for whatever reason in their ancestry, but all left-handed. First man to land on the moon, walk on the moon, Neil Armstrong, also left-handed. And like I said, according to NASA, they also say that roughly a quarter of the astronauts are all left-handed. So we are what we are. Famous artist Leonardo da Vinci, left-handed. Paul McCartney, guitar player. You've seen him sometimes. He's a little bit different. He plays, well, left-handed. And but now Ringo is also left-handed, but he plays right-handed drums. Go figure. Out of history, Napoleon Bonaparte, left-handed. President Barack Obama was left-handed. So was Garfield. So was Herbert Hoover, Harry S. Truman, Jerry Ford, Ronald Reagan, even George H.W. Bush are all left-handers. And so plenty of presidents who were left-handers. You want to get in technology? Bill Gates, left-handed. Also, Mark Zuckerberg, guy who invented Facebook, as well as Steve Jobs from Apple, all left-handed, right? Now, getting into the acting business, Charlie Chaplin was left-handed. Hugh Jackman plays on the Mystery Guys or whatever it is, X-Men, I think it is. He's left-handed. Joan of Arc, famous. See, back in those days, if you were left-handed, you were evil. That's what they figured. You were a heretic, you were evil, because when they had weapons back in those days, the person carried a weapon in their right hand. And when you shake hands with somebody, you didn't have your weapon in your hand. That's why people shake hands right-handed, because that way they don't have a weapon in that hand, so they can shake. Nobody's going to kill each other, except the evil left-handed people. They can shake hands right-handed, but carry the weapon left hand. They were heretics. They were dangerous. They burned them at the stake like Joan of Arc. Also, composers, Mozart, left-handed. Here's another person, Helen Keller. Now, she was blind and deaf and everything else, but apparently she did a lot of her stuff left-handed. In sports world, Babe Ruth, yep. Now, if you get into science, both Marie and Pierre Curie, they were both left-handers, two doctors. You're into cartoons, Matt Groening from The Simpsons, left-handed, and a lot of his characters, you know, are also left-handed. The artist, Michelangelo, left-handed. Aristotle, left-handed. Spike Lee, film guy, left-handed. Keep going down the list. Harpo Marx, called him Harpo because he played the harp. He couldn't read a lick of music. He couldn't read music. Played a left-handed harp, but taught himself to do music. Couldn't do it. Now, Celine Dion, My Heart Will Goes On, you know, Titanic, left-handed. The Cook, Gordon Ramsay, he's left-handed. And finally, you get Ben Stiller, Jerry Seinfeld, Tina Fey, even Richard Pryor. All of these folks are left-handed. So yes, only about 10 to 12% of America and the world are left-handed. But when you take a look at who's famous, some very, very famous people are left-handed. And now, you know. You know, it may be hard to believe, but the first quarter century of this century, 2000, is over. And now we're checking out the second quarter. But I want to talk about people we lost in the last year of the first quarter. All right, these are some famous people that you may remember, you may recognize, and some of you may not know, but I'll try to fill you in as best I can. First one, Robert Redford. Classic actor. You probably remember him in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the classic The Sting, The Natural. So many movies that he played in. Robert Redford left us in the year 2025. And then another great American actor, Gene Hackman. Gene Hackman, Popeye, French Connection. But I want to think one of the numbers that I remember, Hoosiers, great movie about Indiana, about winning a championship. But one of the things that people don't really remember was he was in the Mel Brooks movie, Young Frankenstein. Played a very small part, blind guy with a monster. I don't think he got really paid much, basic scale. He just wanted to be in the movie. Gene Hackman passed away 2025. Moving on to the ladies. Another classic actress, Diane Keaton, Annie Hall. Remember the Woody Allen films? She was in many of those. And she was a classic actor and funny and serious. But Annie Hall passed away in 2025. Now, if you want to move to the world of sports, here's a guy that a lot of people didn't know of because his name was George Foreman. He was a big-time boxer. I mean, we're talking a heavyweight champion. But really, his name to fame became George Foreman Grills. That's what made him famous, folks. And he made a whole lot of money selling George Foreman Grills. And follow him by a classic director. This director, well, you may remember him as Meathead in the All in the Family series. And that was, well, many years ago. But he became a director. And not just a director's director. And I remember some of his movies. One of my favorites, The Princess Bride. Yep, that was one of his classic movies. And When Harry Met Sally, yeah, another famous movie, all done by none other than Rob Reiner. In the music world, we lost Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy was that heavy metal guy. I didn't understand half of what he was saying. I remember the only time I ever saw Ozzy Osbourne was in a Cubs game. Happened to be there. He and his wife were there. They waved hi to everybody and the fans who you could see them. He sang "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," I think. Not sure exactly what he was singing, but Ozzy Osbourne left us. And Jane Goodall. Remember, she was a famous scientist. Talked to the chimps, talked to the animals. And she was really known for that. That was the way she lived her life. Jane Goodall, passing in 2025. Going back into the world of sports, classic wrestler, WWE champion. You've seen him a lot. Everybody knows who he is. Hulk Hogan, the Hulkster. Hulk Hogan. Remember him in wrestling, commercials, even political stuff. There was Hulk Hogan. Now, after him, Malcolm Jamal Warner. Well, some folks say I don't know who that is. If you watched The Cosby Show back many years ago, he played Bill Cosby's son, Malcolm Jamal Warner. And then, well, here's another classic artist. I mean, probably one of the greatest of my era, because his music, well, everybody knows. Brian Wilson, the lead singer and lead writer for the Beach Boys. Brian Wilson passed away in 2025. Now, here's another one. Brigitte Bardot. Classic Vavoom, whatever it was, the bikini wearing Brigitte Bardot. Well, she also passed away in 2025. And then, well, Top Gun 2, Val Kilmer, Iceman. Probably remember him also in the movie Tombstone. Val Kilmer passed away in 2025, another classic actor. And, well, this one you may not know. Ace Frehley. He was a lead guitarist for the group Kiss. That's right, the group with the wild makeup, the wild style, the tongues, the whole thing. Lead guitarist passed away in 2025. Michael Madsen. A lot of folks don't know who Michael Madsen is. He was a heavy. He was in a couple of gangster type movies. He was in Reservoir Dogs. You remember that one? Kill Bill. Yep, he was in that particular one. Michael Madsen. And here's another lady. I remember her in WKRP in Cincinnati. She was the secretary. Supposed to be dumb, but she wasn't. Lonnie Anderson. She appeared in a lot of other movies, ended up being married to, well, Burt Reynolds. Marriage didn't work out. I'm not sure that even worked out in the world of Burt Reynolds. I have some issues right there. Lonnie Anderson, gone in 2025. And then finally, let's go down to Cheers. Cheers, the bar in Boston where everybody knows your name. And when he walked into the bar, everybody yelled, "Norm!" And he had a pithy thing to say. There he was, sitting at the bar for all those years, George Wendt. George Wendt passed away in 2025. And that, folks, is just some of the folks who left us in 2025, the first quarter century of this century. So here we are into 2026. You never know who's going to go next. But that's the thing about life. It's not forever. It's not infinity. You're born, you live, you die. And that's the story of life. And frankly, most of these people will end up in a plot of land somewhere with a headstone. And that'll be their name. And, who they were, some are what they were. But overall, they gave us something, entertainment. They gave us sports. They gave us music. They gave us things that we remember even today. The passings of those in 2025. And now you know. Well, if you're a parent in the state of Indiana, you probably, and every other parent probably does too, regardless of where you are, have one of these, right? Well, the chances are that if you've got kids, even young kids in grade school, the chances are pretty good they've got one of these, right? Let's be honest. Since the days of parents being concerned about what their kids are doing and what things are going on in an emergency, everybody seems to be concerned about making sure they're in communication with their kids. And I guess you can't blame anybody for that. But here in the state of Indiana in 2024, involving schools, a law was passed. And that law says that those cell phones that you give your kids, even your young kids, first, second, third grade, whatever, they can only be utilized uh, they can only be utilized outside of instructional time, which means you go into class, the teacher says, "Hey, everybody put away their cell phone." Now, does that work? Well, in the beginning, it was kind of a concern because many kids, they don't like being in school. They're just sitting on their cell phone. They're playing, playing games, whatever. But now they're using the deans from schools to come in. The teachers call, and then the dean takes away the student the cell phone, and if the student does it a second time, the student's suspended. And you can understand those rules. But well, a new law has been introduced in Indiana House and in the Senate, both the House and the Senate, that would mandate. I use the word mandate because that's exactly what it says. Mandate that phones be securely stored at school or left at home during the entire school day. Now, you imagine your kid going out. You got a kid, whether he's young, old, high school, grade school, middle school, whatever. You say, "Johnny, Susie, leave the phone at home." Not only that, maybe they got a laptop, or maybe they have a smartwatch. Yeah. Under the new potential legislation, if it were to pass, they would not be allowed to have those in school. Now, that bill was introduced in the House by John Tresca, North Liberty, and also introduced in the Senate by a couple of Republican senators, Jeff Ratz and Greg Good, saying that, hey, we're going to ban these things that out of school. They can't bring them to school. They're not allowed. Now, some of you parents are going to say, how dare they do that? I've got to know what my kid is doing. I've got to be able to know to contact my kid if I'm going to be late picking him up or her up or whatever. Well, as it turns out, they've done some testing to see if taking away cell phones makes the kids smarter. Well, as it turns out, in that testing, they figured out that scores in math and the scores in English jumped up pretty dramatically. One school they tested. And I mean, it went up severe, 18% to 40%. And English went up a pretty good amount too. And what they have learned is, if you actually talk to students and lecture the students, rather than trying to do the whole thing on a laptop, this whole concept that during the COVID, when they gave every kid a laptop, right? Take it home or e-learning stuff. Kids don't learn that way. People don't learn that way. I mean, let's be honest. We're old enough to know that when we went to school, you had to sit there and listen to the teacher lecturing you. You had to take notes if that's what you did. But the biggest thing is, uh, you got to have one-to-one going on. You got to have someone talking to you, say, here's something you need to know. Well, the idea of taking away the phones, the laptops, and even the smartwatches away from kids is a possibility here in the state of Indiana. I'm not sure if it'll pass in this particular session because it is a short session as compared to the long ones when they do the entire budget. But this short session, will they pass it? Don't know. But right now, most of the educators in school thinks this is a good idea. They like the idea. Now, parents with kids are going to say, no. Many of them say, we don't like the idea because we can't reach our kids in an emergency. Now, that's totally understandable based on things that have happened in past years. Where will this bill go? I don't know. Will it be approved? I don't know. But we do know that right now, there is a law in the state of Indiana that during instructional time, you can't have the cell phones. Some schools take it away, put them in lockers or whatever. The problem is you put them in special lock things, they worry about them being stolen. And the other thing is kids tend to be flighty, and some kids forget to take it home. The end of school, what's your phone, Jimmy? Oh, I forgot it at school, Mom. All right, it happens. So, do you want to have phones restricted or cell phones restricted totally from your school where a kid can't bring it? You want them restricted on their laptop? And you want it restricted on their smartwatch? Well, it's up to you. You got to call your representative or your state senator and voice your opinion. But right now, those bills have been introduced. Where they end up is anybody's guess. But it may happen unless you, the citizenry, actually speak up. And now you know.